The rain hammered against the stained glass windows of the cathedral, a relentless, drowning rhythm that matched the pounding of my heart against my ribs. The air inside smelled of expensive lilies, burning wax, and the metallic tang of ozone, a suffocating perfume that did nothing to mask the underlying scent of danger. I stood at the very back of the nave, my fingers gripping the rough fabric of my dark blue dress, the starch of my white apron digging into my waist. I was invisible here, a shadow in a room full of predators, a maid standing on the periphery of a funeral for a man who owned half the city. They called him the Dragon of Soul, a ruthless kingpin who had ruled with an iron fist, but to me, he was just Daehyun. The man in the mahogany casket at the altar was not a monster, and more importantly, the man in the casket was not meant to be there. I watched as the sea of black umbrellas and charcoal suits parted, the mourners bowing their heads in a performance of grief that felt as hollow as the cathedral's vaulted ceiling. His brother, Junho, stood at the podium, his face a mask of solemnity that barely concealed the gleam of triumph in his dark eyes. He spoke in rapid, clipped Korean, his voice echoing off the stone walls, weaving a narrative of tragedy and succession. I didn't need to understand every word to know he was lying. I knew the truth because I had felt the warmth of Daehyun's skin only hours before the accident. I knew the rhythm of his breathing, the specific cadence of his pulse which I had memorized in the quiet, stolen moments before dawn. My legs trembled, threatening to buckle under the weight of the impossible choice before me. If I stayed silent, the man I loved would be buried alive, sealed away in darkness forever. If I stepped forward, I would be signing my own death warrant, marking myself as a target for the most dangerous criminal organization in the country. But then I looked at the coffin again, the polished wood gleaming under the dim lights, and a memory flashed through my mind, his hand covering mine, his voice rough with sleep, promising me that we would find a way out. I took a breath, the air rasping in my throat, and before my fear could paralyze me completely, I pushed open the heavy oak doors and stepped into the aisle. The sound of my footsteps was swallowed by the storm outside, but my voice, when it came, cut through the silence like shattered glass. "He's not dead," I screamed, the words tearing from my chest, raw and undeniable. "Stop the funeral. He is not dead." The reaction was instantaneous and terrifying, a ripple of shock that transformed the solemn gathering into a tableau of violence. Every head turned, a synchronized wave of hostility, and the sound of 100 bodies shifting in the pews was like the rustle of dry leaves before a fire. Men in dark suits moved with practiced fluidity, their hands reaching inside their jackets, the dull glint of steel flashing in the candlelight. I froze, my hands raised in a gesture of surrender that felt pathetically inadequate against the arsenal pointed at my chest. Junho looked up from the podium, his eyes narrowing as he recognized me, a flicker of irritation crossing his face before it settled into a cold, amused sneer. He said something to his lieutenants in a low, dangerous tone, and the guards nearest to me stepped forward, blocking my path. "The help is confused," Junho said in English, his accent heavy and mocking, his voice projecting easily to the back of the room. "She is grief-stricken. Perhaps she spent too much time cleaning the master's quarters and lost her mind." A ripple of dark laughter moved through the front rows, but I didn't flinch. I couldn't afford to. I kept my eyes locked on the coffin, willing the wood to splinter, willing him to wake up. "I'm not confused," I shouted, my voice shaking but gaining strength. "Check his body. He isn't cold. The paralysis. It's a toxin. I know what you gave him." The accusation hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. The laughter died instantly. Junho's smile vanished, replaced by a look of sheer, predatory malice. He descended the steps of the altar slowly, his movements graceful and predatory, like a tiger stalking wounded prey. "You make dangerous claims, little girl," he said softly, closing the distance between us until I could smell the expensive cologne and the stale smoke clinging to him. "Disrespecting the dead is a sin. Interrupting the mourning of the family is a death sentence," he signaled to the guards, two hulking men with impassive faces who grabbed my arms, their fingers digging into my biceps with bruising force. "Take her out back," Junho commanded, turning his back on me as if I were nothing more than a stain on the floor. And make sure she doesn't interrupt us again. Wait. The command didn't come from me, and it didn't come from Junho. It came from the front row, from a woman sitting in a wheelchair, draped in layers of black lace. Madame Park, the matriarch, the only person Junho feared. She tapped her cane against the marble floor, the sharp sound echoing through the cavernous space. Let her speak, the old woman rasped, her voice thin but laced with an authority that made the guards hesitate. Junho stiffened, his jaw tightening. Grandmother, this is a farce. She is a maid. She knows nothing. Madame Park turned her head slowly, her eyes milky with age, but seeing far more than anyone gave her credit for. She claims my grandson is alive, she said, her gaze drifting to the coffin. If there is even a breath of truth, I will not bury him. Bring her here. The guards didn't release me, but they shoved me forward, marching me down the long aisle toward the altar. Every step felt like walking the plank. I could feel the eyes of the organization boring into me, assessing, judging, planning how to dispose of me later. I focused on the white apron I wore, clutching it like a shield. It was the only thing identifying me, the only reason I had been allowed into the building in the first place, and now it felt like a target. When I reached the front, Junho blocked my path to the coffin, his body a wall of expensive wool and suppressed rage. You touch him, he hissed, his voice so low only I could hear, and I will cut the hands from your wrists. I looked up at him, trembling, but the image of Daehyun's face, the kindness he hid from the world, the way he looked at me when we were alone, gave me a surge of adrenaline that overrode the terror. If he's dead, then you have nothing to fear, I whispered back. Let me see him. Junho hesitated, his eyes darting to his grandmother, then back to me. He stepped aside, a mock gesture of chivalry that was terrifying in its insincerity. Go ahead, he said, gesturing to the open lid of the casket where only the top half was visible. Say your goodbyes to the master. I approached the casket, the smell of lilies becoming overpowering, mixing with the scent of formaldehyde that I knew was a lie. There he was, Daehyun. He looked peaceful, his sharp features softened by the makeup they had applied to make him look lifeless. His skin was pale, almost translucent, and his hands were folded over his chest, clutching a rosary he never used in life. My heart hammered against my ribs, so hard I thought it might bruise them. I reached out, my hand shaking uncontrollably, and brushed the hair back from his forehead. His skin was cool to the touch, and for a split second, doubt seized me. Had I been wrong? Had Junho actually killed him this time? But then I moved my hand down to his neck, pressing my fingers against the hidden pulse point just behind his jaw, a spot he had shown me once, jokingly, after a sparring match. If I ever stop fighting, he had said, breathless and sweating, check here. If this beats, I'm still in the game. I pressed down, ignoring the collective gasp of the room at the desecration of touching the body. I waited. 1 second. 2 seconds. The silence in the cathedral was absolute, a vacuum waiting to be filled. And then I felt it. Faint. Thready. Uneven. But there. A beat. Thump. Then another. Thump. Tears flooded my eyes, blurring my vision. He's here, I sobbed, turning to face Madame Park. He's alive. I can feel it. Junho lunged forward, his composure shattering. Liar, he roared, reaching for his gun. She is defiling him. But before he could fire, a sound cut through the chaos, a sound that froze everyone in their tracks. It was a gasp, a wet, desperate intake of air, loud and rattling, coming from the coffin. The cathedral erupted. It was as if a bomb had detonated in the center of the room. Screams rang out, chairs were overturned, and the distinct crack of gunfire shattered the stained glass windows above us. I didn't look to see who was shooting. My entire world narrowed down to the man in the box. Daehyun's body convulsed, his back arching off the satin lining, his hands clawing blindly at his throat as the paralysis toxin wore off, leaving his lungs starving for oxygen. Help him, I screamed, grabbing his shoulders and trying to pull him up. He can't breathe. He was heavy, dead weight shifting into frantic, uncoordinated struggle. His eyes flew open, wide and terrified, the pupils blown out, seeing nothing but darkness. Keisha, He choked out, the name barely a whisper, distorted by the fluid in his lungs. Hearing my name on his lips in front of everyone, his family, his soldiers, his enemies, was a declaration of war. I wrapped my arms around his torso, heaving him upward, my dark blue dress instantly soaking up the sweat and condensation from his skin. Junho was screaming orders, but the loyalty of the room had fractured. Half the men were looking at their resurrected leader with awe and fear. The other half were looking at Junho for instructions on how to kill a ghost. Get him out of here. Madam Park's voice rose above the din, sharp and commanding. Protect the family head. Two men I recognized, guards who had always been loyal to Daehyun, rushed the altar, not to attack us, but to shield us. Bullets sparked against the marble steps near my feet. Move! One of the guards yelled, grabbing Daehyun's other arm. We hauled him out of the casket, his legs dragging, his expensive suit rumpled and twisted. We stumbled through the sacristy door, the heavy wood splintering under a hail of bullets, just as we slammed it shut. The noise of the cathedral was muffled instantly, replaced by the frantic echoing of our footsteps in the stone corridor. Daehyun was coughing violently now, his body trying to expel the remnants of the poison, his weight leaning almost entirely on me. Junho, he rasped, his voice sounding like gravel grinding together. Did he see? He saw everything, I said, struggling to keep him upright as we navigated the narrow hallway toward the rear exit. He tried to bury you, Dae. He was at the podium, Daehyun's face twisted, a flash of pain that had nothing to do with the poison. He gripped my arm, his fingers digging into my flesh with desperate strength. You shouldn't have come, he wheezed, stumbling as his legs refused to cooperate. You put yourself in the middle. I stopped for a second, forcing him to look at me. His eyes were clearing, the fog of death receding to reveal the sharp, intelligent intensity one loved. I wasn't going to let them put you in the ground, I said, fierce and low. I don't care about the middle. I care about you. A crash from behind us signaled that the door had given way. The sounds of pursuit, shouting voices, heavy boots, grew louder. The guard, a man named Minjun, kicked open the back exit, and the roar of the rain hit us like a physical blow. The alleyway was slick with oil and water, dark and menacing. A black sedan was idling there, its engine purring, a getaway car that Madam Park must have had on standby for her own exit. Minjun threw the back door open. Get him in, he shouted over the storm. We have maybe 30 seconds before they swarm the alley. I shoved Daehyun into the back seat, his long limbs tangling, and scrambled in after him, the wet hem of my maid's dress catching in the door as the car screeched away, tires smoking against the wet pavement, leaving the funeral and our old lives far behind in the rain. The silence inside the getaway car was suffocating, broken only by the rhythmic thumping of the windshield wipers fighting a losing battle against the torrential downpour and the ragged, wet sound of Daehyun trying to breathe. I sat in the back seat, his heavy head resting in my lap, my hands stained with the makeup that was smearing off his face, revealing the pallor of sickness underneath. Minjun drove with a terrifying precision, weaving through the labyrinthine back streets of Seoul, taking corners at speeds that made the tires scream in protest. Every time the car swerved, Daehyun groaned, his body seizing with tremors that vibrated through my own bones. Stay with me, I whispered, brushing the damp hair from his forehead, my fingers trembling. You didn't wake up just to die in a back seat. His eyes fluttered open, dark and unfocused, struggling to fixate on my face. Keisha, he murmured, his voice sounding like it was being dragged over broken glass. You shouldn't be here. It was the same refrain, the same stubborn refusal to accept help that had defined him even when I was just the maid bringing him tea in his study. Shut up, I said, my voice cracking with a mixture of fear and affection. Save your breath. I looked out the window. The neon signs of the city were blurring into streaks of red and blue, reflecting off the wet pavement like spilled oil. We were heading away from the opulent districts, away from the hills where the dragon's estate looked down on the common people, and deeper into the industrial sector where the shadows were long and the questions were few. The reality of what I had done began to settle in my stomach like a stone. I was a maid. I folded sheets. I polished silver. I didn't participate in high-speed chases, and I certainly didn't resurrect Mafia dons. But looking down at him, seeing the vulnerability in the man who terrified half the continent, I knew I had crossed a line that had been erased behind me. I couldn't go back to invisible. I was visible now, glaringly, dangerously visible. Min-jun slammed on the brakes, the car skidding into a gravel driveway hidden behind a rusted corrugated fence. "We're here," he announced, his gun already drawn as he scanned the perimeter. "Safe House B. No one knows about this place except Madam Park and the old guard." We hauled Dae-hyun out of the car, the rain instantly soaking us to the bone. The safe house was a derelict warehouse, the inside smelling of dust, stale oil, and neglect. Min-jun kicked the door shut and bolted it, plunging us into semi-darkness until he flipped a breaker, illuminating the space with harsh, flickering halogen lights. There was a cot in the corner, a medical kit, and a table loaded with firearms. We laid Dae-hyun on the cot, and I immediately went to work, my training as a nurse, a life I had left behind in the States before everything went wrong, kicking in. "I need water and towels," I ordered, stripping off my sodden apron and tossing it aside. It landed in a heap, a symbol of my servitude discarded. Min-jun hesitated, looking at me with new appraisal, then nodded and ran to fetch the supplies. I unbuttoned Dae-hyun's shirt, my fingers slipping on the wet fabric. His chest was bruised, marks from where they must have administered the toxin. "Tetrodotoxin mix," Dae-hyun gasped, grabbing my wrist as I worked. His grip was weak, but his eyes were clearing.
"Junah, he likes
poetic poisons." I looked at him, my heart aching. "He paralyzed you. He was going to bury you awake." Dae-hyun let out a dry, bitter laugh that turned into a cough. "Efficiency. It runs in the family." I began to wipe the sweat and rain from his skin, the intimacy of the act charging the air between us. In the mansion, touching him like this would have been a death sentence. Here, in this dirty warehouse, it was the only thing keeping him tethered to the world. "Why did you do it?" he asked softly, his gaze locking onto mine. "You could have walked away. You could have gone home." I paused, the towel hovering over his heart. "This is my home now," I said, the truth of it surprising even me. "And I don't let people throw away things that matter." The hours that followed were a blur of tension and hushed whispers. Min-jun paced by the window, peering through the cracks in the boarded-up glass, while Dae-hyun's strength slowly returned. He sat up on the edge of the cot, shirtless, the dragon tattoo on his back seeming to writhe as he moved. The toxin had left his muscles twitching, but his mind was sharp, honing in on the betrayal like a missile. "Junho moved too fast," Dae-hyun said, his voice regaining its command. He assumed I was dead the moment the needle went in. He didn't check the dosage. Arrogance, he looked at me, his expression softening for a fraction of a second before hardening again. "He will tear the city apart looking for us. And he will start with the staff. Anyone who saw you. Anyone who knows you." A cold chill went down my spine. "The others," I whispered.
Cook.
"The gardeners. They don't know anything. It doesn't matter," Dae-hyun said grimly. "Junho cleans house. He doesn't leave loose ends." He stood up, swaying slightly before steadying himself against the table. "I need the ledger." Min-jun turned from the window. "Boss, the ledger is in the main vault. In the penthouse. That's the first place they'll lock down." Dae-hyun slammed his fist onto the table, rattling the ammunition. "Without the ledger, I am just a ghost with a story. The ledger proves the money laundering, the payoffs, the betrayal of the council. It's the only thing that will make the other families turn on Junho. Without it, he is the legitimate heir, and I am the usurper." He looked at me, and I saw the calculation in his eyes. He didn't want to ask, but he had no choice. I stood up, smoothing the wrinkles of my dark blue dress. "I can get it," I said. Both men looked at me as if I had suggested flying to the moon. "Absolutely not," Dae-hyun growled, stepping toward me. "You are not going back there. You are the face of the resistance now. If they see you, they won't see me," I interrupted, stepping into his space, matching his intensity. "I'm the maid, remember?
I'm invisible."
"I know the service corridors better than you do. I know which floorboards creak in the hallway. I know the laundry chute drops directly into the sub-basement where the vault ventilation is. I took a deep breath. And more importantly, they're looking for a man. A dead man walking. They aren't looking for the help. Dae-hyun stared at me, his jaw working. It's suicide, Keisha. It's survival, I countered. You said it yourself. Without that book, we're dead anyway. Let me do this. Let me be more than just the woman who screamed at your funeral. The silence stretched, heavy and thick. Finally, Dae-hyun reached out, his hand cupping my cheek, his thumb tracing the line of my jaw. It was a gesture of possession and terrifying vulnerability. If you don't come back, he whispered, low and dangerous, I will burn this city to ash. I'll come back, I promised, though I could feel the lie of certainty on my tongue. Just make sure the car is running. The return to the dragon's estate was a surreal nightmare. I was smuggled into the back of a delivery truck Min-jun had arranged, hidden behind crates of produce destined for the kitchen I used to clean. The rain had stopped, leaving the world slick and glistening under the moonlight. The estate was a fortress, lights blazing in every window, armed guards patrolling the perimeter with dogs. I slipped out of the truck while the driver argued with the gate security, rolling under the chassis of a parked SUV and waiting until the boots marched past. My heart was a frantic bird in my chest, battering against my ribs. I made my way to the servants' entrance, a small, unassuming door half hidden by ivy. It was locked, but I knew the trick, a hard kick to the bottom panel while jiggling the handle. It clicked open. The smell of the house hit me instantly. Lemon polish and old wood, a scent that used to mean safety and routine, now reeking of danger. The house was quiet, too quiet. The staff must have been dismissed or detained. I moved through the shadows, my sneakers silent on the plush carpets. I avoided the main hallways, sticking to the narrow service passages that ran like arteries behind the walls of the mansion. I could hear voices drifting from the main study. Junho's voice, loud and angry. Find them. I want their heads on spikes by morning. I froze, pressing myself against the wall. I was inches away from the man who wanted to kill me. I forced my legs to move, climbing the narrow spiral staircase that led to the master suite. The master bedroom was a wreck. Junho had torn it apart looking for anything Dae-hyun might have hidden. The mattress was slashed, the drawers overturned. But he didn't know about the loose tile in the ensuite bathroom, the one under the heavy clawfoot tub. I had found it months ago while scrubbing the grout, a hollow sound that piqued my curiosity. I had never opened it then, respecting boundaries I no longer cared about. I scrambled under the tub, my dress catching on the jagged porcelain, and pried the tile up with my fingernails. There it was, a small, black leather book and a digital drive. The keys to the kingdom. I grabbed them, shoving them into my bra, the cold metal against my skin a grounding reminder of the stakes. Well, a voice drawled from the doorway. My blood turned to ice. I scrambled out from under the tub to see the head of security, a man named Vance, leaning against the doorframe, a suppressed pistol in his hand. I told Junho the maid was smarter than she looked. He smiled, a cruel twisting of lips. You should have kept running, sweetheart. I slowly raised my hands, my mind racing. I was in a bathroom. Hard surfaces.
Confined space.
I was unarmed. I just wanted my things. I lied, my voice trembling convincingly. I left my passport, Vance laughed, stepping closer. You think I'm stupid? You came for the leverage. He raised the gun, aiming for my leg. Give it to me, and maybe I'll let you live long enough to say goodbye to your boyfriend. I looked at the gun, then at the heavy bottle of expensive bath oil sitting on the rim of the tub next to me. It was now or never. Okay, I said, reaching into my dress, as if to retrieve the drive. Okay, don't shoot. As I pulled my hand out, I didn't hold the drive. I grabbed the heavy glass bottle and hurled it with every ounce of strength I possessed. It wasn't a perfect aim, but it smashed against his hand, the glass shattering and the oil exploding everywhere. Vance yelled, the gun firing wildly into the ceiling as he slipped on the slick oil spreading across the marble floor. I didn't wait. I lunged past him, my shoulder checking him into the doorframe, and bolted into the bedroom. Get her, he screamed, his voice echoing down the hall. I ran like I had never run before. bursting out of the bedroom and sprinting toward the laundry chute at the end of the hall. Footsteps thundered on the stairs, guards coming up from both sides. I was trapped. The chute was my only option. I threw open the small hatch and dove headfirst into the darkness, sliding down the metal tunnel that smelled of detergent and dirty linen. I tumbled out into the basement laundry cart, landing in a pile of sheets with a bone-jarring thud. I scrambled out of the cart, gasping for air. But before I could orient myself, the basement door burst open. Junho stood there, flanked by 3 men. He wasn't smiling anymore. "Did you really think," he said, walking toward me, his gun leveled at my forehead, "that I wouldn't watch the exits?" I backed away until my back hit the industrial washing machines. There was nowhere left to go. "He's alive, Junho," I said, my voice defiant despite the tears pricking my eyes. "And he knows what you did." Junho stopped a few feet away, the muzzle of his gun looking like a black tunnel to hell. "He is a relic," Junho spat. "And you're a loose end," he cocked the hammer. "Goodbye, Keisha." I closed my eyes, bracing for the end. But the shot didn't come. Instead, a deafening crash shook the room as the high basement windows shattered inward. Smoke canisters rolled across the floor, hissing and spewing thick, white fog. In the confusion, gunfire erupted, controlled, precise bursts. Down, a voice roared. It was Dae-hyun. He hadn't stayed in the car.
He had come for me.
I dropped to the floor as bullets chewed up the washing machines above my head. Through the smoke, I saw him, a silhouette moving with lethal grace, Min-jun at his side. They cut through Junho's guards with terrifying efficiency. Junho fired blindly, screaming in rage, but he was outmatched. Dae-hyun emerged from the smoke, slamming the butt of his gun into Junho's wrist, sending the weapon skittering away. He kicked his brother in the chest, sending him crashing into the wall. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the hissing of the smoke grenades. Dae-hyun stood over his brother, his chest heaving, his face a mask of cold fury. He didn't look at Junho, he looked at me. He walked over, stepping over the bodies of the men who had tried to kill me, and pulled me to my feet. He checked me for injuries, his hands frantic and gentle. "I told you to wait," he scolded, but there was no anger in his voice, only relief. "I got it," I whispered, pulling the book and the drive from my dress. "I got the ledger." Dae-hyun took it, looking at it for a moment, then tossed it to Min-jun. "Upload it. Send it to the council. Send it to the police. Send it to everyone." He turned back to Junho, who was struggling to sit up, blood running down his chin. "It's over, brother," Dae-hyun said quietly. "You wanted the crown. You can have the ashes." Sirens began to wail in the distance. The real police this time, or perhaps the enforcers of the other families. It didn't matter. We walked out of the basement, leaving Junho amidst the wreckage of his ambition. We walked out into the cool night air, the storm finally breaking, leaving the sky clear and full of stars. Dae-hyun stopped at the edge of the estate, looking back at the house that had been his prison and his kingdom. He took my hand, intertwining his fingers with mine, not as a master and a maid, but as equals. "Where do we go?" I asked, looking up at him. He looked down at me, and for the first time, the weight of the world seemed to lift from his shoulders. "Anywhere," he said, "as long as you're there." And as we walked into the dark, leaving the sirens and the violence behind, I knew that while the dragon might be dead to the world, the man was finally alive.